Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we have a really big episode planned out for today. Hope everyone enjoyed their week and is ready for the weekend. I know for me, I'm getting geared up to watch some baseball, some football, a little bit of basketball, definitely trying to fit it all in this weekend. Today, we have a lot to cover, some recent developments in the baseball world, some recaps, and a whole lot more. So I'll first dive right into some game recaps from Tuesday, September 15th, and give some updates in the standings where teams sit currently in their respective divisions. I'll next get into the recent developments of the Music City baseball team that is starting to slowly form, still have a long road ahead, but I'll unpack everything from the latest developments on the expanding of the MLB in Nashville. Later, we will get into some talk on the upcoming free agency frenzy that will happen this offseason heading into the 2021 season, who some big-time names are that could be on the move, what the seasons are they are having this year, and if anyone is helping or hurting their value for free agency. And be sure to stay here for the final few minutes of the show today, as I will discuss what new rules in the MLB I could see sticking around for good, which ones don't seem to have a chance of staying, and what the overall consensus is with the new rules. Really good show ahead of us, but I want to first dive into some recaps of Tuesday, September 15th. Some really good games going around the league. First one to start things off, Brewers, Cardinals, and this is a matchup between these two teams that is going to be vital for both teams' playoff hopes moving forward. Both of these teams have yet to play each other up until this past week, have yet to play each other in this season, which is very uncharacteristic since they are two teams in the same division. But because of the Cardinals having so many cancellations due to COVID-19, they ultimately had to reschedule a lot of these games for later on, and that later on has finally come. So these two teams play each other 10 times. Well, obviously a little less from now, but still, having 10 games, or there were 10 games that were remaining in this season that these two teams would be facing off against each other, very, very pivotal for both of these teams. So to get it started, Brewers won 18-3, absolutely jumped all over the Cardinals, scoring 2 runs in the first, 2 in the third, and then they put up 7 in the fourth and 6 in the fifth. That really propelled them into a huge victory over the Cardinals. Brewers moved to 22-25 on the year, while the Cardinals are 21-22, so they have dipped under 500 right now, and I'm going to get to the Reds in just a second, but they're starting to pick up momentum. They're starting to steamroll their way through the division. They're now third place, right behind the Cardinals, sitting very, very comfortably in that third place position, but they have now moved themselves from that 4 spots out of the wild card to now only 1 spot out of the wild card. So they are really trying to make some headway moving into the postseason. So the next game, Reds winning 4-1 over the Pirates. Reds scored the first 3 runs in the bottom of the first and then 1 run in the bottom of the second. Pittsburgh was only able to tack on 1 run in the top of the fourth. Tucker Barnhart had a solo home run for the Reds. Brian Goodwin actually had a home run robbery on Tuesday. So a huge defensive play by Goodwin, who has been a really nice addition to their team. And honestly, coincidentally enough, it's not Castellanos and Moustakas that we might be talking about. It might be Brian Goodwin and Jesse Winker, who could be really being the difference makers in Cincinnati. Freddie Galvis had an RBI single also. He's been playing a little bit better lately. He's really struggled this year coming into Cincinnati from Philadelphia this past offseason, but a really good win by the Reds. They're 24-26, and the Pirates now dipping down to 14-33, really struggling this season. Moving on to the next game, Rays Nationals, and this was a really big win by the Rays. I mean, I was watching some of the game with a friend of mine who's a big Tampa Bay fan, and they were putting on runners constantly. Bases loaded happened, they must have had bases loaded 2 or 3 times in the same inning on multiple occasions. So they're a very, very good team at getting guys on base. And I know I've mentioned it before. They're great at getting guys on base and then moving them over strategically, either through steals, through sacrifice hits, whatever it might be. They're really good at getting those runners to advance forward. Rays winning in this one 6-1. Tampa Bay scoring the first 2 runs of the game in the bottom of the second and then tacking on 4 more in the bottom of the fifth. That was a really, really big fifth inning for the Rays. Ryan Yarbrough, he had a 5 strikeout evening. He got the win. He's 1-3, his first win of the year, 3.97 ERA, and I've talked a little bit about Ryan Yarbrough before. He's going to be very good. I think that it's just a matter of time before he starts to really find his own and come into his own. He's got a lot of good stuff, a large repertoire of pitches, and having him and Tyler Glasnow, I think, could be really, really huge for their rotation moving forward if they can keep both pitchers, A, healthy, and B, on the team. I think Tyler Glasnow, and between those two guys, has a little bit of a brighter future. I think Glasnow's, his frame is very ideal for a pitcher. He's about 6'8", long, lanky, athletic, throws the ball really, really hard. He's got a great release point where he lets the ball go, and it actually minimizes the amount of time in which the batter can react. And I know I've mentioned that a lot, but that can do a lot for a hitter. That just little extra, inch or so that you're releasing it. Baseball's a very fine-tuned game. It's just a little adjustment here, a little tweak there that makes the hugest difference in the world. And having that difference right there in Glasnow releasing it from one point to another, maybe an inch different, could have a totally different outcome with the batters that he's facing. But Glasnow's been pitching much better as of late, I should say. This year he was struggling mightily earlier on. But Yarbrough picking up the win, really great win for the young pitcher for the Rays. Great win overall. The Rays have started to really show their dominance. 31-17. Nate Lowe homers also. He hit a huge home run. Kevin Kiermaier had a 2-run single as well. So they've got a lot of guys that aren't necessarily these wild superstars, but they get the job done. They're very, very productive players, very similar to how the Oakland Athletics are. Nobody that is, a stellar baseball player or somebody that is, a perennial all-star every year or an MVP caliber player, but they've got the pieces that they need, the necessary pieces to win, and that's what they've been showing so far. And now they've got, a good hold on first place in the NL East. And again, we're going to see a totally different king of the NL East this year if the Yankees don't pick up the pace here in the next 2 weeks. Next game, Red Sox-Marlins. Red Sox surprisingly getting the win, 2-0 over the Marlins. Red Sox scored 1 run in the 6th and then 1 run in the 8th. Marlins are now 24-22. Red Sox are 18-31. They have fallen on hard times, but again, I think this is a year that they're going to use almost as kind of a throwaway year and say, hey, you know what? This wasn't our year. We had a lot of injuries. We had a lot of guys, lost to trades or whatever, the pandemic, so on and so forth. We're going to just, put this year aside, and we're going to focus on next year. And I think that they've already started to do that. And I could see them, make some moves in free agency potentially this year. If they get rid of a guy or two, I don't know, what their payroll situation looks like right now, but they're paying a lot of guys a lot of money. So if they can get rid of 1 or 2 guys, unload their contracts, and they can take on, 2 players that they could really use, moving into next year. I know that they need some bullpen pitching, and, they're a team that no matter what, they're never going to shy away from more hitting. So if they can find a player, out on the free agent market that is, a really solid hitter, I think it's going to really help them out, down the road. But we're going to talk a little bit about some free agents here in a little while on the show. Next game, Mets-Phillies. Phillies winning this one 4-1, and the Phillies have really started to find their rhythm here as of recently. And I know a couple episodes ago, this was way back when, I had mentioned briefly, I feel like the Phillies could be a surprise team that could maybe find themselves in that second place spot. But now, it's really starting to show, and it's starting to really become a pertinent thing that, Philadelphia, they're here for the playoffs. They want to go all the way. And I think that they've got a legitimate shot. They're in third place right now, sitting a half a game back behind Miami, but Miami getting a crucial loss last night and the Phillies picking up a win, that is going to help their stock so much more. And the Mets, they've really started to slip 7.5 games out of first place, so they've really fallen on hard times. Phillies scoring 2 runs in the bottom of the 4th and 2 in the bottom of the 5th. The Mets were only able to score their solo run in the top of the 5th. Didi Gregorius. Let me tell you what about Didi, okay? Didi Gregorius, I was looking at his stats earlier on in the season, and they were not great. I mean, I was really shocked. I said, okay, they get rid of Galvis. They're going to give up a little bit of their infield. They're going to add Gregorius. I think that they're going to be pretty good with him. But, it didn't really in the beginning show so much. It really wasn't kind of the outcome that I had figured, because Gregorius has got a great bat. He's now leading the team in batting average with a 282 clip, and he's got 31 home runs. So he's having a really good bounce-back season, and he's having a great kind of turnaround of a season, if you will, because earlier on in the year he was really, really struggling. I mean, he was hitting around 230, 240, and he's now started to pick it up a little bit. So really great win out of the Phillies, able to, and again, they need to continue to separate themselves from the Mets, because they don't want to allow the Mets any sort of wiggle room in the last 12 games, 13 games of the season, and ultimately that could, be the difference maker in the Phillies making it over the Mets or what have you. So Phillies need to keep on going forward, but I think that they're going to be just fine come, postseason time. I think, we could maybe see them in the postseason, maybe. Next game, and this was an absolute routing. Yankees, Blue Jays, Yankees putting up 20 runs. Yes, 20 runs. We've seen one game already this year with 29. We've seen multiple 18, 19-run games, and now we're starting to see another 20-run game. It's kind of weird. These teams are starting to play better offensively later on in the season, and I don't know if it's just the opponents are starting to get tired or the bats are finally starting to wake up for certain teams. Yankees scored 7 runs in the second, 5 in the third, and 4 in the fourth. So right there, you've got, 16 runs in 3 innings? That is a lot of offense in a very condensed amount of time. They were able to put on 1 more run in the 6th, 2 in the 7th, and 1 in the 8th. Toronto was only able to tack on 1 in the 2nd, 2 in the 4th, and then 3 in the top of the 9th. But again, that top 9 inning was kind of a throwaway half inning for the Blue Jays, because there was probably very little, if any, chance that they were going to come back and beat the Yankees. They hit 6 home runs against the Blue Jays. 6. So everybody talks about, the pitching and the batting and the lineup that they've got and the power hitting that they've got. But then everyone also says, and I fall guilty to that also, people are starting to get injured. Judge has been injured. Stanton has been in and out of, the injury reserved list. Also, Gary Sanchez has struggled mightily this year. Gio Urshela, he's also been on the IL a couple times this season. So, you kind of you bounce back and forth. Yeah, they've got a great lineup. They've got a lot of power hitting, but are they going to stay healthy? And that's kind of the big question. And when they're healthy, it's very clear what they're capable of doing. I mean, Luke Voit, I need to make one little mention about him, because he has absolutely turned on the Jets here in the last couple of games, and he's really started to pick it up. I mean, 18 home runs. He hit his 18th home run on Tuesday. Huge season for Luke Voit. I mean, he's got 18 homers. He's got 42 RBIs. He's having an awesome year in pinstripes, and this might be a guy that they could look to as just that added extra, power hitting come playoff time, because who knows what's going to happen with Stanton and Judge and Urshela and Sanchez, if they're going to stay healthy, if they're going to be hitting well. Not to mention, he's got a 280 average and a 977 OPS. So he's clearly able to hit for contact, but he's also clearly able to hit for power, as it's very, very obvious in just the fact that he's able to, rack up 18 home runs. He's going to probably push 20, if not surpass that number. And in a condensed 60-game season, that's very hard to do. DJ LeMahieu also had a home run. Weirdly enough, he actually hit a home run off a 48.7 mile-an-hour pitch. One of the slowest pitches probably registered in, baseball history, if not the slowest ever in the modern era, if that. Again, I'm not quite sure who was pitching at the time for the Blue Jays, but throwing a 48-mile-an-hour fastball, or whatever kind of pitch that is, I think anybody could potentially hit that, far. I don't know about a home run, but could definitely at least make contact. And for a lot of just regular Joe Schmoes like myself out there that are just, they no shot of absolutely ever hitting a Major League Baseball pitcher's pitch, that would probably be the one opportunity that myself and other, non-professional athletes would have at getting a hit off of a pro pitcher, because normally that would not happen. But a 48-mile-an-hour fastball or 48-mile-an-hour question mark of a pitch, no wonder LeMahieu teed off on that. I mean, he absolutely teed off on that. So great win by the Yankees, 27-21. They've started to turn things up a little bit here in the last, 10 or 12 games. Blue Jays are 26-21, so very similar records, and kind of odd to see the Blue Jays are going toe-to-toe with the New York Yankees, because the Blue Jays last couple of years, they have not been relevant at all. Next game, a little AL Central matchup, Royals-Tigers. Tigers winning 6-0 over the Royals. Detroit scoring 3 runs in the first, 2 in the third, and 1 in the sixth. The Royals, again, not able to put up any runs there. Royals are now 20-29 on the year, while the Tigers are 21-26. And the Tigers are slowly starting to slip out of, playoff contention. And it's really unfortunate to say that. Now, they're only 2 spots behind the 8th and final spot in the playoffs. They still have to get over Seattle. And after that, you have to, again, overcome Cleveland and Toronto. And Cleveland is already in their division and has been playing lights-out baseball all year long. Minnesota and Chicago are also in that division. Chicago currently owns the 1 seed in the playoff picture, and then the Twins own the 4th seed in the playoff picture. But again, 2 teams right there that are above 600 in winning percentage. I mean, the Detroit Tigers would have a lot of ground to make in the next couple games. They would probably have to play nearly perfect baseball. Miguel Cabrera hitting a solo home run for the Tigers. Willie Castro also hitting a solo home run for Detroit. A lot of big-time hitting for them. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's coming at this point of the season a little bit too late. But, hey, if they're able to turn up, the notch a little here in the next few weeks, we could maybe see them push the Indians or at least push the Mariners to try and get to, as close of the 8th spot in the playoffs as possible. Next game, Braves-Orioles. Braves winning this one 5-1. Atlanta scoring the first run of the game in the 3rd inning, and then tacking on another run in the 4th inning, and then they put up 3 runs in the top of the 9th. So Baltimore giving any sort of chance for themselves into that bottom 9th, well, they really kind of did the opposite of that in that top 9 inning, giving up 3 runs to Atlanta, and it was all she wrote for the Orioles. I mean, they were able to score 1 run in the bottom of 9th, but that was it. Freddie Freeman had 3 hits on the day with 2 RBIs. He actually had an RBI double, so again, having a really big bat in the lineup like Freddie Freeman, it's going to really help them out come, October time. Dansby Swanson also had a sac fly RBI, which was able to score a run. Really, really just an awesome win by the Braves, 29-20. Orioles are 21-27. They're starting to slip just a little bit here, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can also turn things around. But, 6 games under 500 with, under 10 games to play now, not a great sign. Not really in your favor at all. Next game, Rangers-Astros. Astros winning this 4-1. Astros scoring the first run in the first, and then 1 run in the 5th. Texas scored 1 run in the 5th, and then the Astros added 2 more runs in the 7th and 1 in the 8th. George Springer actually hit a home run, and I know that is kind of, I don't want to say, well, George Springer, he's been hitting, he's been hitting a little bit better as of late, but earlier on in the year, he was hitting, a poor batting average. Really poor. Carlos Carrera has really been kind of the leader on that team in terms of hitting this year. He's leading the team with a 274 clip. And George Springer, he's, kind of brought his average up a little bit. It was floating around 200 at one point or another, but he's at 240 right now. He's having an all right power year. He's got 10 homers, 25 RBIs, and 838 OPS. So he's going to be an interesting free agent, and I'm going to, talk about free agents again, like I mentioned in a little bit, but he's going to be a very interesting free agent. He's getting a little older. His power numbers are still there, but his contact numbers not so much. They're starting to go down a little bit, and with a very, very popular shortstop class in the 2021 free agency, it's going to be interesting to see where Springer winds up, if he's going to be kind of, left by the wayside, or if he's going to be a guy that, players and teams are going to be interested in. So we'll have to see with that when that time does come. Alex Bregman also had a 2-run single. So, again, very shocking that Bregman has been hitting well also, because he has not been hitting well at all this season. And so very shocking he had a good outing at the plate on Tuesday. Next game, Twins and White Sox. White Sox winning this one 6-2. And again, this is going to be a series. And I know I mentioned this series in a couple episodes ago when I talked about, how these 2 teams are going to stack up against each other. And they're going to really, be the deciding factor, if you will, in the AL Central. This is a pivotal series. White Sox, like I said, 6-2 over the Twins. White Sox getting the first run of the game in the bottom first. Minnesota putting on a run themselves in the top of the third, but in the bottom of the third, that's where Chicago put the difference. And that was 3 runs there. Minnesota only was able to tack on 1 more run, and then Chicago put on 1 run in the bottom of the 6th and then 1 run in the bottom of the 7th. Tim Anderson hit his 8th home run of the year, and Tim Anderson has played so much better than he did the first half of the year, completely turning around his season. I mean, at one point he was hitting below 200. He's now hitting well above 300, right around where he was last year. Really good sign that they have Tim Anderson back to normal form as we get closer into the playoffs. Jose Abreu's also been playing very well. Eloy Jimenez has been hitting the ball very well. They've got a lot of pieces that could really propel them into a far run into the playoffs. So it's going to be fun not only watching the White Sox, but also watching the Twins. I think they're going to be, an exciting team also. Byron Buxton had an inside-the-park home run. He's a very good young player that I think, moving forward, we could hear a lot more about. And if the Twins can hold on to him, he's going to be a crucial member of their team in the future. Randy Dobnak actually picking up the loss for the Twins, very oddly enough, 6-4 on the year for Dobnak, 4.05 ERA. And I hate to say this about Dobnak, but his ERA has started to skyrocket. And earlier in the season, I know I mentioned that he's, probably, I don't want to say, at the time I would have said a Cy Young candidate for sure because he was putting up those types of numbers. But as of right now, totally different story. A 4.05 ERA, 6-4 record, that's not going to get the job done for you. So, was Dobnak's strong start kind of a fluke? I don't want to say that quite yet because this is only his second year in the MLB. So we have to really see, come year 4, come year 5, if it was actually a fluke or not, or if he's just, kind of on a little bit of a rough patch right now, and it's just a matter of him, kind of changing the momentum, the direction in which he's going in right now, and kind of pivoting and turning another direction. So we'll see if Dobnak can pick it up here in the last couple weeks because he's going to be very important for this Twins team in the playoffs. Next game, Indians-Cubs. Cubs winning this one 6-5 in a very close one. Cubs scoring the first run in the bottom of the second, and then 2 runs were scored by the Indians in the top of the third. Cubs were able to score 2 in the bottom of the 5th, but it was a walk-off hit-by-pitch that ultimately sealed the victory for the Cubs. So, again, something that you don't want to have happen if you're the Indians. Little miscues like that, freebies as they're called, miscues, whatever you want to call them. You can't have those, and you can't afford those, especially with this, very pivotal time of the year, especially for the Indians. I mean, sitting in that 8th spot, they've got the second wild card spot, and they're not really that close to the Twins and the White Sox, which is kind of, coincidental enough because, 2 weeks ago, the Indians were actually in, a better position than the Twins were, but the Twins started to pick things up a little bit, and now it's the Indians, falling to 26-22. Cubs are 29-20 on the year. Nobody's talking about Chicago. Nobody is talking about them. And I had a conversation with a couple friends of mine the other day about it, and we all agreed, this team is not being talked about like they should because, almost at 30 wins this year, they're going to surpass the 30-win mark, and everybody's paying attention to the Padres, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Rays, rightfully so. But the Cubs kind of have been forgotten a little bit, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people in the playoffs in fall time. Javi Baez also had a big home run for the Cubs. Jason Hayward, he actually had a huge outfield assist that threw out Francisco Lindor at the plate. So although his bat has kind of struggled in the recent memory, he's still a great fielder. And, his bat is still, it's still there. It's not non-existent. But he's not the hitter that he was that rookie year he had and, the second year he had earlier on in his career. Next game, Rockies Athletics. Rockies winning this one 3-1 over the A's. First run was scored by Oakland in the second inning, and then 2 runs were scored by Colorado in the 5th, and 1 was scored in the 6th by Colorado also. Great game by the Rockies. And again, a lot of these games are going to be pivotal for them moving forward because they are 2 spots out of the 8th spot in the top 8 for the playoff picture. So any wins right now is going to be crucial. The A's are 30-19, so they really don't have a whole lot to worry about. I personally don't see the Astros catching them, and I know I've been very critical of the Astros, but I think, fairly enough, they have reasons to be, they have reasons to give people to, make people think or at least be critical of them because with all the offseason stuff that went on with them, and they're clearly not the same team that they were before all this came out. So it makes you really wonder, was that the reason they were so good? They're at 500 right now, and they are, nearing the top 20, maybe the top 15 in offense, whereas last year they had the number 1 offense. So again, really makes you question, really makes you wonder, was it actually legit, or were they a team that was only good because they were cheating? And right now it's starting to kind of come to fruition and kind of start to show a little bit that they definitely might have been a team that was good, mainly because they were sign stealing. Elias Diaz had his first homer of the season for the Rockies. Really, again, a very promising career ahead of Diaz. And, just a great win by the Rockies. And they're going to need any sort of wins that they can get moving forward because, the time is ticking for sure. Not just them, but many other teams. Next game, this was a really, really big one. A battle of the NL West. Dodgers, Padres, two of the 30-plus win teams in the MLB going at each other. Dodgers winning this one 3-1. LA scored 1 run in the first, and then both teams scored 1 run in the third, but then the Dodgers tacked on 1 more run in the fifth, and that was it. Edwin Rios had a solo home run for the Dodgers. Really, just a great overall kind of battle between these two teams, right? Padres are 32-18, Dodgers are 34-15, so two of the more, formidable opponents for, both in the MLB and in the division. Zach Davies had a really good outing for the Padres, but unfortunately wasn't able to get the win. He moves to 7-3 on the year. He did strike out 5, but having a 2.69 ERA as a starter for the Padres, I think that's going to be a really good thing moving forward. They've got Dinelson Lamet, who I personally think could really make a run for the NL Cy Young. They also added Mike Clevenger, so they've got pieces now. They've really got pieces. They got Trevor Rosenthal coming out of the bullpen. They've got Drew Pomeranz coming out of the bullpen. Kirby Yates has been struggling, but he's got the capabilities of being really good out of the bullpen. So this Padres team could be a lot more dangerous than people, I think, give them credit for. And I think a lot of people look at the hitting, but the pitching, it has really come a long way, and it's really starting to bolster, especially with, already how well guys have been playing this year, but also the acquisitions that they made during the trade deadline. So great win by the Dodgers, but, don't get discouraged if you're a Padres fan because you all are just going to be just fine come October. Next game, and actually the last game of the evening, because the Giants and Mariners game was postponed due to poor air quality in Seattle. I'm going to get to that in just a second. Before, though, Angels, Diamondbacks winning 9-8 in a very close, high-scoring one. 2 runs were scored by Arizona in the first inning, followed by 2 more in the second inning. So 4 runs were scored already by the Diamondbacks going into the third inning. They actually tacked on 3 more, and they went into the bottom third inning with a 7-0 run, or a 7-0 lead. Angels put up 1 run then, and then they put up 5 runs in the fifth and 2 in the sixth. They were able to tie things up, and they were able to potentially force extra innings, but the Arizona Diamondbacks scoring that 1 go-ahead run in the top of the 8th inning. Cole Calhoun had 2 homers, 5 RBI day for him. David Peralta had the go-ahead home run for the Diamondbacks. Diamondbacks are 18-31, while the Angels are 20-29, so both teams pretty much out of the playoff picture. But I think moving forward, the Diamondbacks, I think they have got a lot to look forward to. They got rid of Robbie Ray, who was not pitching well for them at all, and I think that if they go out in the free agent market, they go out, try and pick up some more infielders, because I think that they could really use, a nice third baseman somewhere, someone in the outfield, or even some pitching, honestly. I think this Diamondbacks team could be a force to be reckoned with in the NL West. Do I think they'll be as good as the Padres or the Dodgers? Not so much. But I think that, with how the Giants and the Rockies can play at times, I think the Diamondbacks could legitimately, be competitive with those teams and possibly find themselves in the future being kind of a third-place team if, the Padres are able to keep everybody around for the foreseeable future, and if the Dodgers are also able to stay healthy. So big win for the Diamondbacks, unfortunate loss for the Angels. But like I mentioned, Giants and Mariners were postponed due to poor air quality, and that really is kind of a frightening thing. With all the wildfires that are going on in California, and we hope that everybody in California is staying as safe as possible and, getting to shelter, because that is just such a frightening thing, really. I've got a, very, very good friend of mine that lives in California, and he and I talk a lot, and he always tells me about, how the air and the sky just looks so eerie these days with all the forest fires, and now we're starting to see it affect baseball games and starting to affect professional sporting events, which can never be a good thing, right? So we hope that, things can get a little bit better over on the West Coast so we can get baseball going back up, especially over in Seattle. But a lot of good things with these standings, because I'm really excited to see, how the Padres and the Dodgers finish out, who is going to be crowned the champion of the NL West. But the AL Central, that's going to get, very interesting with the White White Sox, Twins, and the Indians all, within 6 games from each other, things could get very interesting. White Sox are on a 6-game winning streak. They're 9-1 in their last 10, so they don't have any signs of slowing down at all. But them and the New York Yankees, they are 2 of the hottest teams in baseball right now, and as well as the Cincinnati Reds. I've got to tip my hat to the Cincinnati Reds. They're on a 4-game winning streak, 6-4 in their last 10. They've become, they're within 5.5 games of first place. Do I think they're going to catch the Cubs? Absolutely not. But if they can continue to play the way they've been playing the last 4 or 5 games, they could maybe catch the Giants. I mean, the Giants are 23-24, so there's only really 1 or 2 games that separate those 2 teams. It's going to be very interesting. The last week of baseball is going to be the most fun baseball week in the regular season that we've watched so far. I guarantee that. So a lot of stuff to look forward to, and I'm getting really excited for the postseason. That'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I will discuss the latest news and developments on the possible expansion of the MLB in Nashville, Tennessee. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got things rolling with recaps from the games on Tuesday, September 15th. Had some really good action and a lot of playoff races starting to heat up in the MLB. Be sure to stick around for the final few minutes today, folks, as I'll discuss the chances of certain rules in the MLB that are new this season that might be staying around as permanent changes, and which rules will probably be out by next season. I want to now jump into some recent news surrounding a growing story about baseball potentially expanding into Nashville, Tennessee. I know a few episodes ago I had talked about cities that could possibly be the next ones to get a baseball team, and I had mentioned Nashville, and I do remember there was some rumors going around about a group trying to form a baseball team in Nashville. So as I was reading a lot more about the developments of this team, there was a lot of momentum actually going towards the direction of bringing a baseball team to Nashville. The team name, if it were to land in Nashville, would be the Nashville Stars, and it's actually paying homage to a Negro League team, and they were also called the Nashville Stars, and the Stars would be the first MLB team to be named after a Negro League team in history, which I think would be incredible. That would be awesome. In addition, they are pushing to be the first African-American majority-owned baseball team in history, and they would also be the second pro sport team to have a majority of African-American ownership next to the Charlotte Hornets, who have Michael Jordan as their owner. So again, really interesting story, very good, awesome stuff that could be going on in Nashville very soon. Dave Stewart, a former MLB player and World Series champion, as we all know, with the Oakland Athletics, he's one of the members of the advisory committee for the Music City team, and he's been instrumental in the forward progression of bringing a team to the music-oriented city. So, I mean, having him on the side of the Nashville Stars, I think is huge. He's one of the few African-American GMs in baseball, and he's been very outspoken over the many years about wanting to get baseball to become more diverse, especially in their management and in their ownership offices. So he's a huge driving force behind this. They also added some huge pieces to their ownership group recently with Tony La Russa, who we all know, former incredible manager for the St. Louis Cardinals, had a long stint with them. He's already been a member. A former GM, Dave Dombrowski, also joined the group, he was a ginormous part, really, of building those World Series winning teams in Boston. They also added recently, very, very recently, music great Justin Timberlake, who has serious ties to Memphis, as he is a native to the state, and he is a huge sports fan. I mean, he was very instrumental and had a huge part in the city of Memphis bringing the Memphis Grizzlies, the NBA team, into Tennessee. He actually has a part ownership with the Memphis Grizzlies as well. So again, a very important person to have on the side of the Nashville Stars to potentially bring this team into the city. The plan for the team would be to present their expansion proposal at the winter baseball meetings in 2021. So not this upcoming winter, but the following winter. And the MLB wanting to, definitely try and expand to 32 teams potentially. At least that's a lot. A lot of rumors are going around about the league wanting to do that. It fits perfectly with what the Music City Group is trying to do. I think it just goes right with the MLB's agenda, trying to expand teams, trying to, get the MLB into new markets and new cities. The problem is the Athletics and the Rays are trying to get their renewal of their stadium approved. And if that goes through, they may have to go back to the drawing board to figure out, what city they should try to expand to next. Now, as we know, the Rays were on the verge of moving potentially to Montreal, and that continues to be a topic to this day. There's actually a lot of talk still about maybe the Rays splitting time and basically sharing their team in between two cities, splitting the season between half the time in Tampa Bay and the other half the time in Montreal, which to the life of me, I really don't understand what the point of that would be, having, two teams or having one team in two different cities. I mean, how can you say can you legitimately say you're a fan of that team if you're, I guess you can, but it's just another conversation for another day, I guess. Now, Dombrowski has been huge in trying to get a team to the city also. He recently sold his home in Boston. Again, he's a former GM of the Red Sox that won, two World Series titles. And he has gone so far as to saying that he would stay with the group even if he got a GM job somewhere else. And he will stick around until they are eliminated from the consideration of expanding altogether. So somebody who, again, is very behind this and is in a huge support in trying to bring this team that I think would be huge to have in Nashville. I mean, I've always thought, even, a couple years ago, I always wondered with the Predators and how good they've been, and the Titans recently now becoming very good, a city where, there's a lot of, sports fans, it's a nice, ideal weather city to have a baseball team. They have nothing going on in the summertime. Why not have an MLB team? I think it would work perfectly in their market. The Stars could make a huge difference in the sports world with the inclusion of also black ownership and the beginning of, diversifying ownership at the professional level. Like I mentioned, Dave Stewart, like the others in the group, has been a ginormous in trying to, make not only Nashville home to the next baseball team, but also the ownership and management in baseball to be more diverse across the board. He's been outspoken even back during his playing years when he was with the Athletics so many years ago. So again, somebody who is very vocal on this and is really trying to, push this agenda forward. With Timberlake also now on board, they will try to promote the aspect of music, and he wants to, somehow, some way unite sports and music in a very unique way. And I think this could be an interesting aspect to sports, especially with baseball, with it being known as a dry sport for most of the, for the most part. The idea of having music as a major theme of the game day experience, it could bring life into the stadium and really bring life into the experience at the ballpark, at least at a Nashville Stars game, and make it a very unique experience for fans and spectators alike to go to games and attend these games. Now, the stadium they are planning to build will have 42,000 seats in honor of the great Jackie Robinson, and they plan to have the stadium built hopefully by 2024 and then start playing that same spring. And honestly, the other night I was with some friends and I was telling them, hey, we should try and make a little, plan a trip or something to go to Nashville if this were to all, fall into place. Go to Nashville and catch a Stars game for either opening day weekend or, at some point that summer of 2024. That would be a blast. I mean, I personally would be a ginormous fan of that. I've always been a big believer in, obviously the expansion of baseball and really sports in general, always trying to tap into new markets and trying to bring a sport that is, again, new to a market that does not have this sport yet. And I think, again, it fits very well with, it's already oriented as a big music city, lots of music concerts, lots of music festivals, especially country music festivals. So having that kind of outside summery feel to it in the city of Nashville, it lines up perfectly with a baseball team. The market in Nashville, again, is huge for sports right now. The Predators, they went to a Stanley Cup not too many years ago. The Titans went to the AFC Championship game last year. So I think this would be a really, really big thing for the city of Nashville to have potentially, a third team now and make it a much more well-rounded sports city. There are other also big names in the music industry that have been added to the group's music advisory board, like Eric Church, Luke Combs, and Kane Brown. All have very serious followings in the music world, especially the country music world, and it just adds to that idea that, the game day entertainment will be top notch, and I think that would, potentially put them over the edge over other teams. I mean, I know, I don't mean to jump around from one sport to another, but just comparing, if this were to fall into place, comparing this team to a recent expansion team in the Golden Knights over in Las Vegas. I've, talked to a few people that have been to games, or at least know people that have been to games, and everybody that I've talked to about it say, they all say that it's an incredible game day experience. Their game day entertainment is top notch. So, they are taking kind of, the Las Vegas theme of, the casinos and kind of the show, the kind of, it's like almost a show, if you will, instead of a game, and kind of a production, and, kind of putting on more of an entertainment feel to a sporting event. And I think that baseball, and especially with this Nashville team, they're also trying to do something very similar to that. And they're just using music now instead of kind of the Las Vegas casino appeal that, the Golden Knights use. And again, I've always felt that Nashville would be a great baseball city, mainly because of the weather. I mean, it's very ideal to have a team there. They only have 2 major pro sports teams, like I mentioned, so a long gap in the summer. I'm sure fans are not very happy that, they have to wait until September when their favorite football team can finally start playing again. There are a few holes in their plan, though, as they don't have a majority owner as of now, no negotiating of territorial rights, and of course the building of the stadium. That has not started yet. So that's, a couple things still need to occur before this can move forward. The Nashville area is experiencing a little bit of an increase in their property tax that could possibly hinder the forward movement of the team. And with the pandemic and people not really coming to the city, businesses are losing a ton of money by the week. And so that is also posing a little bit of a problem. And this city really thrives off the music scene. I mean, the large crowds, all the country concerts that happen. They have huge country music festivals there that are always very, very popular. Lots of people attend, with concerts not going on, crowds being frowned upon. This city has lost out on a lot of money. Now, the backing they have is incredible, though. They have a lot of, a mix of celebrities, former players, smart businessmen that are trying to promote the inclusion and diversity of ownership in sports, but also trying to revolutionize almost how sports games are viewed, with an emphasis on music and the idea of making that part of the experience. So a very unique situation that could be occurring down in Nashville. Now, the Nashville Sounds are the current team that, the current baseball team in the city. They're a AAA team, a AAA affiliate of the Texas Rangers, and they have a large turnout, a very large turnout at most of their games. They actually have, or at least they had, the 3rd highest attendance in all of minor league baseball last summer, with over 500,000 people attending the games in total, an entire summer. A minor league team, over 500,000 people. That is almost unheard of. And on average, they have over 8,000 people going to their games, each home game. That's also a staggering number to have for a AAA team. Now, again, this is a city that, imagine if they were to take all of those fans, multiply it by probably at least 2, maybe even 3 of people that would probably be interested in going to a major league game. I mean, you're going to just automatically have 8,000 people right from the jump, at least 8,000 fans that'll say, hey, yeah, I'll definitely go to a game. And then it kind of snowballs from there. I think it would be met with open arms and a warm welcome from the people in Nashville. I really do. Again, clearly this is a city that is, really starving for some baseball. They enjoy their sports as a whole, and it's a growing city across the board. Makes it an incredible landing spot to have another MLB team. If things pan out well and the city can figure out the finances of the situation, as well as the MLB allowing the city to add the team, this could have a huge impact on baseball. Now, where they will be placed in the AL or the NL, I have no idea. And what division they would be in, maybe the Central or maybe the East. Not sure, which they would most likely, find themselves in. I don't know if they would find themselves in the West per se. Maybe. Who knows? I personally hope this goes through, though. And in 2024, we can have baseball in Music City, because they would be a fun team to watch. Not to mention Nashville, from what I hear, is a phenomenal city. I personally feel that if the MLB does not add another baseball team into the league, it could pose an issue, as they want to have an even amount of teams in each division. The Rays, again, are on the fringe of either completely moving to Montreal or at least sharing time between the two cities. again, I don't really know why they would do that. How do you move your family around? Do you have a house in both cities? Do you keep your family in one city and then, have a rental I mean, again, there's a lot of ins and outs and intricacies that I don't see really working out with that plan. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. But again, if that, if they were to potentially stay, again, there won't be any expanding of baseball really at all. But if the finances are figured out and they get a permit for the stadium and start to really, start on construction, the MLB allows it to go through also with the assumption that another team will most likely or hopefully be added. Then I think this will be a home run not only for the Stars but also for the people of Nashville as well, and all of baseball at that. I mean, having a black majority ownership would be huge for sports. It would be a step that the sports world, needs to take in trying to diversify the sport and sports in general. It could open the doors for other executives to have the potential of being part of, an ownership group. I think it could open up a lot of doors. But again, I think just the whole idea of what that city is all about as it is right now, right? It's a huge country music hubbub, and people always associate country music with being outside in the summertime. Well, what sport is in the summertime? Baseball. So again, you would just grab all of those people that are into that almost scene, if you will, and then immediately they're all going to flood the stands, and they're going to have sold out venues constantly. Now, how well the team will perform, that's, again, we don't know that. We don't have a crystal ball, and we can't see into the future. The Golden Knights, I think, got very lucky. I mean, they're the most recent they're probably the most recent expansion team in the 4 major professional sports leagues, and they had a lot of success right off the bat. But that doesn't happen very often, and I think that the same thing with baseball. And again, if they add this team in Nashville, what are they going to do about minor leagues? Are they going to add, 3 more minor league teams or 4 more minor league teams after they are going to cut, 40 teams last year, and then they're probably going to cut more, if not have already started to do that process. So it's a lot of, again, there's a lot of background work that needs to be done, and a lot of things that still need to occur and still need to fall into place and happen for this to work out in the end. But I personally think it will. I think that there's a good shot that we could have baseball in Nashville by 2024. I love the name of the Nashville Stars. I think that's a great name. I'm really excited to see what this logo would also look like, what their uniforms are going to look like, what the hats will look like, the jerseys, what the stadium will look like, right? I think there's a lot. I mean, that's the stuff that I'm looking forward to and that I'm curious about, because I just, the idea of a team starting new is just very fascinating. And, to see what kind of direction the team goes in, what kind of direction the promotional team for the organization goes in, and what kind of, the marketing and, everything else that goes into building a team, what is going to happen with that and how is that going to all play out. So I'm really hopeful. I think that, again, with all of the people that they've got in their corner and in their camp and in this group, I think it's just a matter of time for things. One thing is just going to offset another. And as a result, it's just going to be, a domino effect, if you will, and then all of a sudden things will start to, really play out in favor of a baseball team in Nashville. So I'm really excited about that, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens in 2024. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for everyone tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll get into the free agency frenzy that is going to happen in the offseason, where I see certain guys going, or at least which players I could see on the move, and the types of seasons they are having, and if they are helping or hurting their stock. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more, so don't go anywhere and don't change that channel, because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and we just finished up discussing the possibility of the MLB expanding a team into Nashville and what the latest developments are involving baseball moving to Music City. I want to now get into some free agency frenzy talk and discuss the various free agents whose contracts will be up after the season and whether or not they are increasing or decreasing their stock with how they've been playing this year. So the first player that I have to get into, because he's really been playing out of his mind this entire season, Trevor Bauer. Bauer will be a free agent after the season, and he will be, by far, one of the hottest commodities in the free agency market without a doubt, especially at the pitcher position. Currently sitting in third place in the MLB in ERA with a 1.71 ERA. He's second in the MLB with strikeouts with 83, and he's first in the NL in that same category. Again, without question, a top pitcher free agent on the market. And although he is 4-3 on the year, I know a lot of people look at records very heavily. I personally don't, because I don't think that's always a reflection of the pitcher, and sometimes it's a reflection of the hitting support he gets that night. His low ERA speaks to the pitcher he is. Again, the losses, that's just the lack of hitting support he's had, and he clearly has been dominating this year. In his last 3 starts alone, he has gone at least 6 innings, and he's struck out at least 7. He's continuing off a very strong career year he had just 2 seasons ago where he was an all-star, and with the capabilities Bauer possesses to limit teams from scoring runs and his increase in innings pitched over the last few years, he is primed to get a big contract come free agency. Where will he go? Good question, because I don't know if he'll stay in Cincinnati, because they will have to pay Castellanos. That's on a pretty much brand new deal, and the same thing for Moustakas. Castellanos and Moustakas have nearly, if not identical, contracts, so the Reds are already going to have to shell out money to them. They may try to go all in and keep him, but he could also be potentially out of their budget with how well he's been playing. Obviously, teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees are always looking to bolster their lineup, but honestly, look to see maybe the Braves try to go after him, adding some, help with Fried. Max Fried's been pitching out of his mind this year, and I think adding Bauer to that rotation, it could really, sharpen things up for their pitching. It would be a great duo, and they already have the young talent that they need to, make a serious run in the playoffs and in the World Series down in the future. Now, it's very interesting because Bauer has claimed that he only wants to be signed to 1-year deals from here on out in his career to maximize the earnings he can get. But who knows how real that is and if he will actually do it. Be on the lookout come December as to where Bauer may wind up, because he may be out of the NL Central by the new year, and he could be in a totally different uniform come 2021. Next player, Marcus Semien. This guy brought a lot of attention to himself last year with a career year in Oakland. He hit .285, he had 33 homers, 92 RBIs, again, all career highs. This year, a little bit different of a story. He's only hitting .227 from the plate. He has his lowest OPS in his career since 2014 with a .695 clip, so he's obviously not hitting as well. And if he isn't able to turn it around come playoff time, it might be a struggle for Semien to bring a justifiable case for a large contract on really any team and to really any team. He does have a load of potential, though. Hitting 30-plus homers is an incredible feat any way you look at it. But he might start to see his time run out if he doesn't start to, turn things up very soon here as we approach, playoffs, honestly. What will really make or break his free agency stock will be this postseason this year and how he performs in the biggest stage for his team. The A's are almost a surefire into getting into the playoffs, but with a sizable lead, or I shouldn't say but, because they do have a sizable lead over the Astros, and that's not going to go anywhere. They seem to be cruising their way to October. This is definitely going to be a pivotal postseason for him because his performance could really determine the payday he will receive. And if this A's team goes really far, which they are capable of doing, I do believe that, even though they don't have, a superstar. Now, I think Semien has superstar potential, but again, he's not showing that this year. But if they're able to put together any sort of run at the playoffs, I could legitimately see them, going to the ALCS, maybe to the World Series. This could really swing, and if they do, and if they do go that far, and if Semien is playing that well, then this could really swing the momentum in favor of Semien towards the end of the year. Although this year right now does not bode well for his cause, he still has the pop in his bat. And, with a loaded 2021 free agency at the shortstop position, he may be a little bit of an afterthought by teams who, might try and wait for guys like Francisco Lindor, who will be a free agent in 2021, Trevor Story, the same thing, Javier Baez. They might all be more so of commodities come 2021 than Semien will be in this 2020 offseason. So we'll have to see if he'll get any sort of, serious looks. Again, it'll be interesting to see the direction in which Semien goes this offseason. I could maybe see the A's giving him his best offer and him sticking around because he has not been playing well, and I don't think a team, especially with just having one really good year and then following it up with a not-so-good year, I don't see a team necessarily going all in on Semien. I don't see that. But a team like the Diamondbacks, who are semi-thin at the middle infield position, they could go after some solid power hitting, and I know that they would probably love him over at shortstop, and they could, they did lose a lot of power hitting at the trade deadline, losing Marte, but they could, gain it right back. They could, help out Ketel Marte, who's more of a contact hitter. So, they obviously have David Peralta. They've got some pretty solid pieces, and if they add Semien, it could, again, bolster their roster a little bit. But Semien will have to really prove himself in these last few weeks to find himself, a really good, solid contract come, November, December, and into possibly even January. Marcell Ozuna is my next guy on the free agency frenzy that I think he's been having an out-of-control year. He's been unbelievable. And talk about someone who's really benefited from the NL having the DH this season because he's put up some impressive numbers. He's putting up career numbers in batting average, on-base percentage, on-base percentage, batting average, and OPS. So, again, an outstanding year for really anybody at the plate that has those types of, career numbers, if you will. Not to mention, he's got 43 RBIs this year. And with, again, 8 to 10 more games about probably by the time this comes out on Saturday, he'll probably have less than that. I mean, he could easily pass the 50 RBI mark if he finishes out, strong the rest of the way. I could really see him, and he would probably be one of the few people this year that I could see hitting 50 RBIs. And, coming into this year, if you had told me that somebody was going to come close to that number, I would have said you're probably kind of crazy. But now that I'm seeing it, and now I'm seeing that guys are actually really benefiting from this universal DH, it's not completely far-fetched. And I can see how a guy like Ozuna, taken out of the field, he just has to, focus on hitting. His numbers are going to skyrocket because he doesn't have to worry about the fielding aspect, and he can be in the lineup every single day, and his bat can be useful every single game. I think if the MLB does keep this universal DH, his stock will skyrocket even more, no question, especially with the fact that he wouldn't have to do any fielding, which would greatly improve his attraction as well. This is his best year since his back-to-back All-Star campaigns back in 2016 and 2017. With all teams now looking for legit DHs, it'll open up the realm of possibilities for where he could potentially land. You could see a team like the Padres try to scoop him up and add even more power to their lineup. But again, would they be able to pay for a lucrative enough deal for him? Because he's going to go into this free agency with a little bit of pull. He's been playing very well. He's shown that he can be a dominant designated hitter in the MLB. Not to mention, again, if that universal DH rule sticks around, it's going to really, really increase his stock even more. The question will be, that's going to be just a real big question, though, is if a team like the Padres are a team that has, already some serious power in their lineup that want to go after some more power, will they be able to pay him? Will they be able to, afford him? But I could also see other budding playoff teams like an Orioles or a Tigers could even add, him to their lineup, try to add more hitting to their own lineup, and potentially help generate more runs for these offensive-oriented teams. I mean, the Orioles, they were one of the top offensive teams in the MLB all year long. The Tigers, they had, at least a top 15 team batting average for this entire season for the most part. So they're going to be looking for guys that can really drive in runs. Not to mention the Tigers, I mean, Miguel Cabrera, he's getting old. Okay, he's getting up in age, so don't be shocked if a team like that could potentially, one of these aging, power-hitting superstars, they go out and then all of a sudden a team's looking around, scrambling and saying, hey, we need to get a designated hitter. We need to get somebody that we don't need their glove in the field. We need their bat at the plate. Marcell Ozuna would probably be their number one, or at least a top 5 choice, especially after the year he's having. But I think he will receive a large payday from a contending team. Who might it be? I have no idea, but it'll be fascinating to see where the slugger will wind up. Next guy I've got to make another mention about, Alex Colomé. He's been pitching out of his mind this year. Great relief guy. I mean, talk about someone who is adding to their free agency appeal this year. Alex Colomé is going to be one of the bigger named relief pitchers in this offseason. In each of the last 3 years, he's hurled an under 3 ERA, and this year it's under 1 at 0.95 with 15 strikeouts. And with 11 saves on the year, this closer is going to be a huge piece for a lot of teams moving forward if they're going to, go in the direction of picking up bullpen pitchers this winter. I think a lot of teams could really benefit from this. There are a lot of teams that their bullpen are very, very thin. And so look to see Colomé be a hot commodity and somebody that is highly sought after on the free agent market. The 2016 All-Star could find himself on a contending team, but don't be shocked, again, if a middle-of-the-road team adds him in the hopes that he can bring some life to the relief pitching. With all the rumors flying around Milwaukee about them possibly wanting to deal Josh Hader at some point, it makes you wonder. I mean, if they could get rid of Hader and pick up a guy like Colomé who can add some serious depth to their bullpen, maybe we see another team that is in the middle of the road that can make a run at playoffs like Cincinnati. I mean, they've got great starting pitching, but okay relief pitching. He could really add a new dimension to their bullpen in Cincinnati. Maybe see a team like Boston who wants to capitalize on their poor year this year by going out and getting a new piece for their pitching. I could see that also happening. Regardless of what the offseason holds for Colomé, the one sure thing is the man is going to see a sizable contract once he hits the market because he's worth every single penny. Next guy, another pitcher, starting pitcher this time, Robbie Ray. And this is a guy who I think is somewhat hurting his stock. He came over from Arizona to the Blue Jays during the trade deadline, was not pitching well in the NL West this year at all. I mean, at all. His ERA when he was traded was nearly 8. I mean, it was at 7.84, but he has come down considerably to a moderate 4.38. He's only pitched in 12 innings so far with the Jays, but in those 12 innings, he hasn't been great either. He struck out 5 in each of his last 2 starts this season with the Jays, but that's really the only highlight of his tenure with the Jays. He's been a big fly ball pitcher this year, and a lot of guys are able to get elevation on his pitches and can drive them, drive those pitches and drive those balls out of the infield, which if you are a team that is looking for a reliable starter, that isn't what you want, since most of baseball now is high fly ball driven and not so much getting hits on the ground. Ray has the potential to be good. I will say that he's got the potential to be a good starter, not a great starter, but a good starter. And as he's obviously shown in his career, he was an all-star in 2017, but I wouldn't say a number one option by any means. I think that if he was a number one option on a team, I think that they would be in a little bit of trouble. I would say that teams that they already have a strong rotation may want to look at Ray as a really solid third option. I think he could be a fantastic third option on a lot of these staffs, or even someone who could get moved into the bullpen and be really efficient in a situation like that. I could see maybe the Royals being a team that goes after him. I mean, low cost since he isn't having a great year, so they won't have to spend a whole lot. Someone they could continue to work with and maybe replace Rosenthal in their bullpen, as they lost Rosenthal to the Padres during the trade deadline. And if Ray were to be converted to a relief pitcher, I think he could be very, very good. I mean, we've seen it already. A couple of these starting pitchers, they get converted into, reliable relief guys, and they pretty much, it's like a born-again career for them. They have a completely, different outlook in their MLB career. Regardless, Ray is going to need to turn these last, few outings into the best ones of the year, because if not, he may really struggle to find anyone to pay him anything of worth. And now that I think about it, I could even see a team like the Reds. They've already got, 2 really, if they can keep Bauer around, if they can keep Trevor Bauer, and they can keep Sonny Gray, I think if they added Robbie Ray to the mix, again, he would be below TJ Anton, who's also been having a really good year. But if you put him in the bullpen, could be a totally different story if you're Cincinnati. You've got power hitting, you've got starting pitching, and now you've got a little bit of relief pitching. I think that could work, but we'll have to see where Robbie Ray winds up. Nelson Cruz is the next guy on my free agency frenzy list. This is probably the most unique case on the list. I mean, there's a lot of different players on this list that have, all sorts of different situations. But again, this guy's got a very unique situation because although he has no signs of slowing down, he is 40 years old. He's putting up career numbers in OPS and slugging percentage. It's the highest it's been in his entire career. And he has 16 homers this year to go along with 32 RBIs in a 60-game season. So incredible numbers to put up at such an old age. Old in regards to baseball players, at least, not in general. He would be a steal for anyone to get, but his lack of play in the field would deter some teams, especially if baseball goes back to having, the AL just in the DH, or having the DH position just in the AL, then he may only be a commodity in the AL because, he's not a huge fielder. He hasn't been a good fielder in years, and he's pretty much been converted into a full-time DH. So, again, staying in the AL would be very ideal for him. But if the NL keeps the DH, look to see a lot of teams go after the slugger because he has the numbers to prove that he is still a productive player. And a lot of these NL teams, they're not used to going after DHs because they haven't had to ever do it. So now, again, a new kind of trend in baseball, he would be my number one DH on this list by far, no questions asked. And as a result, teams are going to start looking at him very, very highly. Last year, he belted 41 home runs and over 100 RBIs. And he's had at least, he's had 4 100-plus RBI seasons since he turned 30 years old. So in his 30s, it seems to be some of the best baseball he's ever played. He hasn't played for an NL team since his rookie year when he played in just 8 games for Milwaukee. So someone who has left their mark on the AL, no question. Could we see Cruz's career finish out in the NL? This could be a potential landing spot for him. I could very likely see that, again, if the DH goes universal. Teams like the Dodgers would obviously love to have a big power bat in the lineup as a DH. They could easily afford him, but here's the catch. And here's, again, a big thing that I read a lot about, and I was also very curious about. How long will a team sign him to a contract? You have to think age will at least eventually catch up to Cruz, and sooner rather than later, he might start to decline. So a team who is coming after him this winter, be very careful of signing him to a deal that is too long, and then you're stuck, paying a 45-year-old washed-up power hitter more money than you should. So that should also be, I really don't see him getting a 7 or 8 year contract. I think at the very most, he would maybe get a 3-year contract. Maybe 4. I think if a team was feeling generous, maybe 4. But again, you'd have to see because it could just be, this could be his last year, and maybe next year, he starts to fizzle out a little bit, and his career decline begins in 2021 instead of 2020. But again, he hasn't been showing any of those signs yet. The Mets would be an interesting place for him to land, with Yoenis Cespedes leaving the team 8 games into the season, and really no word on what the future holds for him. They could look to add more power hitting to an already heavy lineup with Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, and Michael Conforto. 3 big-time bats in the lineup. You add Nelson Cruz, and now you've got a serious team over in the NL East. And for NL teams on the hunt for a DH, this could, spell trouble for others in the league if they don't act quick enough in getting Cruz. But because, he'll obviously be a very popular free agent, and he'll definitely be the most popular DH free agent. It's just a matter of how much he will get and how long his contract will be for. I think that is just going to be the big telling sign. My next guy, Michael Brantley, and he's been having a pretty solid year. He did go through a little bit of a slump at one point or another, but for the most part, he's been the only real constant in this Astros lineup this year next to Carlos Correa that has been, their stars, most of their stars have been struggling mightily following the cheating scandal that they took part in. Brantley wasn't a huge name in that ordeal, so hopefully, that guilt by association doesn't follow him to wherever he lands, but don't be shocked if Brantley is playing for an NL team come 2021. He's got a .305 average this year, and each of his last 3 years all also ended with over a 300 average and over an 800 OPS this season as well, and in the last 3 years. So he's clearly a big hitter in any lineup. A power hitter, though, not the typical definition of a power hitter, but he can still make great contact on the ball. It's not out of the realm of possibility for him to be, a 20 to 30 plus home run guy and a 90 plus RBI. You could totally see that happening in his career at some point or another. He's only 33, 34, so he's got a lot of time. If guys like Nelson Cruz are still doing what they're doing, imagine what a guy like Michael Brantley will be doing at that age. He's never left the AL, though, and for someone who has floated between the outfield and the DH position, he could be an ideal candidate to land in the NL with his ability to be both an outfielder and a DH. But teams like the Cubs and Cardinals, they would be high-profile teams that would love to have his bat in their lineup. They would be able to pay him for the most part what he wanted. Probably for them, they could definitely. I don't see him asking for a crazy amount of money. I don't think that. Could he ask? Yeah, maybe. I don't know if he's really worth all of the money that he would want to ask for, but I don't see him asking for anything crazy. So they could definitely pay him, because I know the Cubs are paying a lot of their guys a lot of money. And, the Cardinals, they're a pretty, high payroll team. I wouldn't say astronomically high, but they're a pretty high payroll team. So they could definitely pay for him. And he could be a player that could definitely fill both a DH role on those teams and an outfielder role. He can do both. So he's not just limited like Nelson Cruz is a little bit. Besides the age difference, again, and that's the big separator and an appealing factor about Brantley that Cruz doesn't have, is that Brantley can field and that he's a capable fielder. And he's, been playing in the field still up until this point, here and there. He's been floating back and forth. Don't be surprised if he heads over to the NL and tries to get out of the AL. But again, that will really be dependent upon, will the DH be universal? I think that will dictate a lot of where guys wind up, and if players stay in the AL or go over to the NL. And Brantley falls right in that category, because at some point his fielding is going to deteriorate. That's going to at some point come in his career. So at some point he's going to flip over to just a full-time DH. I could see that totally happening. When? I don't know. Only time will tell. But we have to keep that in the back of our minds that, yes, he's 33 and yes, he's still fielding, but in 2 or 3 years might be a different story. So he could be on an NL team, and if they don't have a universal DH and they sign him to a big contract, things are fine for the first 2 years, but then his fielding starts to become a factor and it starts to be very poor and go down a little bit. That could be, kind of a big-time miscue or mistake by those NL teams that said, hey, yeah, we'll take you. Absolutely. You can field and you can be a DH potentially. And, obviously, if that were to be a situation where there is no universal DH, then they'd say, hey, you can still field for us. We'll absolutely sign you. We love what you can do, and you've got a great bat. Everything's hunky-dory for the next 2-3 years. And again, it starts to fizzle out. That's where I think teams could run into problems. But I think for the most part, Brantley's going to be a pretty sought-after free agent. It's going to be interesting to see where he lands. In Houston, I don't think so. I personally think he wants to get out of Houston. He was very quiet amongst all of that, stuff that circulated around the team. So look to see him, try and get out of town and try and, really start over, if you will. But again, we'll see what happens. My final guy on the list, Justin Turner. The 35-year-old third baseman, he's still very productive. He's hitting .298 this year, and coming off a year, he hit .290, and the 2 years before that, he was hitting a higher than, 300 in each of those 2 seasons. As he continues to age, though, the question will be, when is age going to catch up to him and he starts to plateau as a player? He's at a point, 35 years old, 2 years older than Brantley, and that is, what could happen to Brantley. A reliable fielder, but then starts to age, and clearly Turner's fielding is not as good as it was a couple years ago, and I'm sure Brantley will be that same situation. So we'd have to see what happens with Turner, what happens with Brantley, and how they kind of continue to age. He's got a really good glove, though. Turner's got a great glove at third. He still is very productive. Got a great bat, so a dual-threat player that can do both, and that would be very appealing to a lot of teams. But I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed in L.A. The Dodgers would be able to pay him for one, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind, not making as much so he could, have other high-profile teammates that are going to help them win a World Series. And if it meant that he could stay on that legitimate contender also in the league and the Dodgers, and they could make an actual run, at the World Series, it would make him want to stay around all the more if he had to take a little bit of a pay cut. So I think he's a guy that if anybody were to stay on their team, most likely it would probably be Turner. He tends to really wake up in the postseason too. So for a contending team, that is incredibly eye-catching. But he is getting older, and although he is a good fielder, definitely not the same fielder he was before. Not saying he's completely washed up at the hot corner, but he is slowly getting there. And I think out of all of the guys on this team, he could stay in L.A. and stay on the team, but he's a part of now. But again, don't be shocked if he eventually, makes a turn to the AL to become a strict DH. If this fielding continues to be an issue and continues to deteriorate, now he could possibly stay in the NL if the DH does become universal. But I have a feeling he will eventually become a strict DH and will be taken out of the field. And if there's no universal DH after this year, look to see him go to the AL immediately. Because I think come 36, 37, if he's still a high-profile hitter and a productive hitter, I think that you'll then see him say, hey, I'm not fielding anymore, I'm sticking right with hitting, and he won't be able to do that in the NL. So I could see him maybe going to the AL, but again, a lot of this is going to be dependent upon this universal DH. I think that there's going to be a lot of things that, kind of happen and a lot of players kind of make their decision based on that rule. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. Wherever he lands, though, he will be an impact player to a certain extent. Obviously, not a huge impact guy, but he can be, a difference maker, especially in the playoffs, to say the least. So I'm very curious to see where Justin Turner will wind up in this offseason. There are a lot more players that are in the market after this year that could be on new teams. Also, I think there will be a lot of things that determine whether a free agent will go to the AL or the NL. And again, like I keep mentioning, it's that universal DH. What is that going to do? How is that going to impact players? How is it going to impact teams, and really, what these teams do moving forward in the free agency. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will get into the rules that are new for the MLB this season that could potentially stick around, and which ones will probably be on their way out after the season, and what the future of baseball will look like if certain rules do stay. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer is still with you, and in the last segment I discussed the different free agents that will be on the market after the season, and whether or not the seasons they are having are helping or hurting their stock as soon-to-be free agents. I want to now get into the likelihood of some rules that have been implemented for this season staying around, and which ones will probably be on their way out after this year. They'll probably not be around anymore just because of either players and teams and ownership and everyone else not liking them, or whatever it might be, or logistics, what have you. There could be some that stick around, there could be some that don't. So I want to get into the obvious ones that I think will definitely not be around anymore after this, after this season. No spitting on the field, the no high-fiving, and the no licking of fingers if you're a pitcher. I think those three rules will all go back to normal. Obviously, once there's a vaccine, I think there's going to be a lot more, everything's going to be back to normal. I think people will obviously still be very germ-conscious and everything. Maybe the no licking fingers will still be a thing, or at least pitchers will be allowed, or continue to be allowed to have a wet rag with them out on the mound, which is a thing right now. They're allowed to have a wet rag that is, usually just soaked in water, whatever it might be, so they can get a grip on the ball. So that could be something that could potentially stick around out of those three, but those are kind of the obvious ones I wanted to get out of the way. Now, the two other rules that I personally am a huge fan of these rules. I really, really like them. And not to mention, I think that they could stick around. At least most people would probably agree that one of these will most likely stick around more than the other. I think both of them could. The first one I want to talk about is the extra inning rule. So the extra inning rule this year is basically where the runner who precedes the leadoff hitter for that half inning in the extras, they come out to second to start the extra inning. So every team starts with a man on second to begin each half inning in the extra innings, and it's usually the guy that would come before the leadoff hitter for that half inning. So I really like this, and the real reason why is because I think it makes extra inning baseball a lot more exciting. And I think that over the years, and this is just something that I have personally paid attention to, and something that I have made note of, is that a lot of people don't like baseball and they aren't a fan of the sport because it's not exciting. There's no exhilaration to it. There's nothing, on the edge of your seat. Now, if you're a huge baseball fan, somebody like myself, or, anybody else out there that is a ginormous baseball fan, you love baseball. So any, bottom nine, 3-2 pitch, situation, or a postseason, Game 7 scenario, whatever, that stuff exhilarates us. We love that, and that's very exciting. But to just the everyday fan, and I have a lot of friends that are just everyday baseball fans. They like going to the game in the summertime. It's a thing to do, whatever it might be. they don't see that same excitement. And I get that. I obviously get that because I see why people would say, yeah, it's not a very exciting sport. These 18-inning games, they drag on. They're 4 hours. They're 5 hours. People need to get home. Kids have to go to school the next day. Parents have work the next day, whatever. And so people get annoyed with that after a while. And so I think by having a guy on second base, it expedites that process of moving through the innings and trying to, still have extra inning baseball, obviously, but make sure that it doesn't drag out and people lose interest. And then all of a sudden, the teams in the MLB, they start losing viewers. And people are like, I don't want to watch this. They're not interested anymore. This has gone on too long. I'm tired of watching this. It's getting too late, whatever the different excuses are. And I think that because of this, this now having a guy on second, now everybody's locked in. Everybody's paying attention. Is it going to be that one hit? Is it going to be that first pitch that's going to send that guy home? That is it going to be a play at the plate that potentially saves the game or whatever it might be? So the possibility for things like that starts to increase. And obviously, in a normal extra inning game, there's always the possibility of one swing and that's it. And we've seen it many times in baseball over the years. But and a lot of people actually are not a fan of this. I saw something, I can't remember where it was, but I saw that Clayton Kershaw was quoted by saying something along the lines of, this rule's fine for now, it's okay for this year, but moving forward, he hopes it's not around anymore. And I could see why players might not like it. Obviously it's not typical baseball, and you're definitely having to strategize very differently. You're starting with an advantage. So it's, okay, we don't have to worry about getting a guy on first and then moving him over. That situation has already been solved for us. So now we've got a guy on second. How do we then move him over to third in, one at bat, and then give ourselves two solid chances at hitting a ball out of the infield and driving in that run, right? So I could see why people are annoyed by that in the baseball world and, mainly MLB players and coaches, because it's, again, a new strategy that you have to implement and that you have to, look into. But, again, back to just, and this is just from my standpoint as a fan, as somebody that covers baseball, as somebody that is, in this line of work, I think it's great. I think that it makes people be, it might make them a little bit more interested in the game. If a game goes into extras, people might say, hey, yeah, I'll definitely watch this. It's not going to go past, the 13th, 14th inning. I would love to see, I don't have it in front of me, but I would love to see the numbers of, 13 inning or more games this season as opposed to other seasons, because it's probably drastically low. I mean, I've seen a lot of games just go, 11 innings, 12 innings, nothing that is 14 innings or 15 innings. I mean, a 16-inning game, I think, would be so far-fetched this season. And it would also make me wonder, what are these two teams doing? How can you not score a run in with a guy on second and there's no outs? Why are you not driving in that run? And again, that has not happened yet this year. At least I don't think so. I mean, again, I could be very wrong, but I have very rarely seen a game go beyond 12 innings. And again, as a result, people are going to become more interested into it, and people are going to become more fascinated by it. But I personally think that it might not stick around. I hope it does, but again, there's not a good reception of it this year, and so I could see that rule being on its way out. But the rule that I really want to get into, and the rule that I think will stick around, and it's going to have, in my personal opinion, a lasting impact on baseball, and that's the universal DH. Now, a little fun fact about the universal DH. Back in, I believe it was the 70s or the 80s, and I was watching this on, I can't remember if it was, Outside the Lines on Sunday morning or, E60 or one of those shows on ESPN. But there's a story that goes about, or that talks about how the universal DH was actually potentially going to be put into the NL back in about the 80s, I think it was. I think it was 70s or 80s. And what happened was there was a big executive meeting with all the, whether it was GMs or just different representatives from each team. And I think it was just NL teams too. And they all had a vote, and they all went into voting on whether or not the DH should be universal. And the story goes that I guess the Phillies had sent, their owner had gone on a fishing trip apparently, and he sent one of his assistants, or he sent somebody on his behalf. and they were trying to get in contact with the owner, about the voting and trying to see what they wanted what the representatives wanted to say and how they should vote. And I guess the story goes that the owner never answered his phone. He was out on a fishing trip or whatever it might have been. And as a result, they kind of just went with a no. And they were kind of, or I don't think they voted, actually, one of the two. And they were ultimately the deciding vote on whether or not the NL should also have the DH. So this could be a totally different conversation we could be having if that one instance had not happened. And again, somebody might have to fact check me on it, but I believe that is what the story goes, is that, again, the Phillies owner sent somebody on his behalf. They tried to get in contact with the owner. They couldn't, so they went ahead and didn't vote or said no, and it resulted in the NL not having the DH. So I think that if the universal DH sticks around and if it becomes a permanent rule, what we're going to first see is teams' batting averages start to go up in the NL, especially because teams in the AL, I think their batting averages are, and again, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think if you were to compare the two, because the AL teams don't have to worry about a pitcher. And a pitcher hitting essentially is a thrown at bat. It's not really, I don't really, in my personal opinion, I don't really weigh it all that much because it's almost a definitive out, or the pitcher is at least just trying to, get through the at-bat so he can get back out on the mound as quickly as possible, or at least, try and rest his arm as quickly as possible in between innings. So the pitchers aren't really trying to get on base. At least 70% of them aren't. So as a result, it makes team batting averages in the NL, if it goes universal, now they have a DH, their batting averages start to go up a little bit because you're not having to factor in pitchers anymore. Now you've got DHs that are going to replace that, and those numbers are going to start going up, just like how the AL probably has those, batting averages a little bit higher because they're not having to factor in pitchers hitting. It will also change the way that NL teams start going after free agents. I know that I mentioned it in my last segment. A lot of these guys that are free agents and a lot of these teams that are going into free agency, they're probably waiting to see what this ruling will be on the universal DH, because that can dictate a lot of what these teams can do and a lot on, where these players can wind up. These players can now all of a sudden go in the NL and not have to stay, just in the AL if they want to be a designated hitter. And now, teams can go after players that they would otherwise not go after. And players can go on teams that they would otherwise not go on. So it will now add a little bit of a new dynamic. Again, I mentioned Nelson Cruz. He's a prime example. What's going to happen if the universal DH comes into effect? We could see almost every single NL team within reason trying to get Nelson Cruz on their team in some way or fashion, whether or not, the budget allows them or not on that said team. That's going to be a different story, but you can almost guarantee that he'll be a massively sought-after free agent in the NL. So you've got, again, changes the way the batting averages and how team batting will be. It'll change how teams go after, players and everything like that. But overall, I think it will also, it might make things a little bit more difficult on NL pitchers, because now they have to worry about, okay, we don't have to, if we get to the bottom of the lineup, we can at least guarantee that one of these guys will get out because we just have to face the pitcher. That's not that bad. Now you have to worry about, there's a potential serious, hitting threat in this lineup now as a designated hitter. And you start to see pitchers pitch differently in the NL, and I think you start seeing hitters hit differently. And you see guys like Marcell Ozuna, who's having an unbelievable year, a career year, and it's not coincidental that it's happening on a year that this rule is coming into effect. Same with Jesse Winker. Jesse Winker is another example of a guy on the Cincinnati Reds who, because of this universal DH, his stock has now skyrocketed because he just has to worry about hitting. And so these guys, their personal stats will start to inflate. At least some of them will. And we'll start to see, certain players, I think, really emphasize on hitting. And I don't want to say that fielding will, fall by the wayside, because it obviously wouldn't, because you still have, 9 other position players to have, out in the field. But no matter, or 8 other position players, excluding the pitcher. But again, you'll automatically have teams, they'll have to scout differently. You'll have teams, go after players differently. You'll have stats looked at differently. Pitchers will be pitching differently. Hitters. It's going to change everything. I really think that it has a lot of impact on how baseball will be moving forward. And again, it'll also impact how we view some of these players. Some of these guys that, are otherwise, before this rule, Marcell Ozuna, in my opinion, was a solid power hitter that had high strikeout numbers and a terrible fielder. A terrible fielder. Now, he's got awesome hitting numbers. He's got great power numbers, and you don't have to worry about him in the field. You don't have to worry about his liability out in outfield. I could see guys like Pete Alonso. He would be another prime example. He would be an unbelievable designated hitter because all he'd have to worry about is hitting, and he does that phenomenally. And I'm not trying to knock his fielding or anything like that. And again, another guy like maybe Juan Soto. As time goes on, if that universal DH rule sticks around, then he gets converted into strictly a designated hitter, and now you don't have to worry about the fielding anymore. So it's going to have a very, very lasting impact on baseball. One that I could definitely see, continuing on for many, many years. And I personally think that it would be a big, and no pun intended, swing and miss by the MLB if they don't keep this rule around, because a lot of people like it. A lot of people have always argued, well, why does the NL not have the DH? Why is it only in the AL? And that's a very good point. Why is it in one league and not the other? You don't have that situation in football where one rule is a certain way in the NFC, and then that same rule is non-existent in the AFC. Same thing in the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference in the NBA. You don't have, a travel, not a rule in the Western Conference, and then, a travel is called every other possession in the Eastern Conference. Now, in the NBA, travel is never called, but, again, aside from the point, you don't have this one rule is implemented in one league and not in the other, or really kind of situation in any sport but baseball. So again, why don't we get with the times? Baseball is much more of an offensive-driven, power-hitting game now. So it takes away from having, the pitcher in kind of a, all right, we'll use him strategically. We'll use him as a pawn to move a guy over at first. If we get, our 7th or 8th hitter on first base, we'll get our pitcher to bunt them over, and it'll be a sure out. But then we'll get a guy in, baseball's not like that really anymore. Now it's, okay, we need to get this ball out of the infield and as far away from home plate as possible and get guys on base and just drive them in nonstop. So that lines up perfectly with what a DH does and what a designated hitter's job is, to drive in runs, to get on base, and to get big hits. That is literally what their job is, and to keep the strikeout numbers low. And if they can also have a high on-base percentage, that's even better. So I think that baseball could be changed forever. I don't want to say changed forever. I don't want to make it sound that drastic, but it will definitely be an obvious change and an obvious difference that we would see in baseball moving forward from here on out if the universal DH sticks around. And again, I really don't see, the extra inning rule staying around. If it does, great. I would love that. I think it would be very exciting and very exhilarating. But if it doesn't, it is what it is. I think that the universal DH, though, has to stay around. And I think that if, baseball wants to continue on with kind of this feeling of, hey, we've got, a lot of offense. Last year there was a career number of home runs hit in a season in the entire league. So it's very obvious that, baseball is going in a different direction, and that's lining up very well with a universal DH. So I think we'll have to see how that plays out and what could, that look like moving forward. But I think all in all, the universal DH will stick around, but the extra inning rule will not. The no-looking fingers will definitely, that may stick around, that may not, just depending on how, germ-conscious people are after this. Obviously, no spitting and no high-fiving. That will definitely, go after, there's a vaccine. And then the taxi squad. That's another rule that's new. Having, as we move forward and minor leagues start to dwindle down and teams start having these kind of reserve squads. I saw an article not too long ago about the number of single-A baseball players that have been brought up to the major leagues because of just the needed numbers. Guys are starting to, whether it's infected with the virus or getting injured or whatever it might be, they're starting to bring up these guys much quicker so they can, again, try and build their stock as time goes on. I think that the taxi squad may or may not stick around, but I think that we could definitely, if it does, we'll definitely start to see, fewer farm systems, obviously, and probably smaller farm systems, but it will be much more of an emphasis on those players in those farm systems, and they probably, their skills and their fundamentals will really be honed in because they'll, the guys that aren't necessarily on the taxi squad will probably just go train at their organization's, team training camp, wherever that might be, in Florida or Arizona or wherever, and, we'll definitely start to see probably the talent pool heighten a little bit. But I think that, again, that's kind of an iffy one. The wet rag out on the mound if you're a pitcher, an iffy one. No spitting, no high-fiving, that's going to be gone. And the base runner at second, maybe, but the universal DH, I definitely think it'll stick around. So I'm really looking forward to next season, even though we're not even close to getting out of this one because we still have another month and a half of baseball. But I'm really looking forward to what unfolds with the MLB and these rules come next season. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date on any and all latest news, content, stuff about episodes. We'd love to keep you all clued in on things moving forward. And again, everyone, thanks so much for joining me. And until next time, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.